All right, I'm Dia. I'm from Singapore. First about the shale in the US, and then what we heard about in China. Um, so what's the future viability of shale? Given the cost of production in the US is already higher than what we've heard is the cost of production for conventional oils, what we have in Saudi Arabia and the others. And that's just in the US where a lot of development has already taken place. And there is the services and the equipment, all of that is there. So if we look at international shale, where resources aren't all that good, the know-how isn't available, probably countries other than China can't even think of getting into this venture because they don't have the financial power and the technical power that China has. So given all of that, and given where prices are right now and the availability of oil in general, what is the commercial viability of shale for the future?
Well, that's a great question. I'll address it initially, but I think you have to remember that the shales in the United States were all drilled. I mean, they had been drilled vertically, and people ignored them. Okay, they weren't commercial at the time that they were initially drilled. People drilled through them for other reservoirs below them. We knew they were there. We didn't know how to produce them commercially, and that's where it's come in with the technology. People have, as they say, cracked the nut. They cracked the code, and they figured out in each of these shales kind of how to do it. It's not an easy concept. I mean, you start off, you saw the progression on the Barnett that Justin showed, and it starts off as one answer, and basically over time you experiment, the operators experiment, and they get to better answers that do bring the commerciality to the project. I think there's a wide range of obviously assets out there. It's going to take some starting, someplace, and when the need is there and the prices are better, then they will take off. I mean, it's not going to take the productivity away, but you do have the cost issue. I mean, costs are cheaper in the United States because we have more infrastructure, more service companies. But as the development starts, it'll get better worldwide too.
If I may add, I think the difference between unconventional and conventional is really just the production and perhaps exploration as well. I mean, leave that to the technical people. But at the end of the day, if you look at the opportunities and the market, it's the same. The product is the same. It's oil and gas. So when you look at it from a long-term perspective, it's going to stay. And in fact, it's going to continue to be more. Few reasons. One is, as we all know, demand for energy keeps on increasing. As the world population grows, we need more energy. Everybody wants an iPad and air conditioner and so on. Secondly, there's an issue about something called energy security, national security issues. Singapore is one where we do not have our own energy resources. So then, if for China, for example, they will develop their shale because that's one of the things I think they have to look at when they look at the bigger picture. And then in the US itself, you see actually in a increase in consumers base. It used to be quite limited, but then now ships are going to run on LNG. They have been. They are going to. The IMO, which is the International Maritime Organization, has set up certain standards. In fact, it will kick in this year to reduce the use of marine fuel oil, which is very polluting. And then there is trucking in the US. They're going to use LNG as a fuel. And then also a lot of the power plants, which are coal-fired, are being converted to run on gas. China is going to use that a lot, gas, because it's a much cleaner energy source than what they're using now, coal-fired and all that. As you know, a lot of Chinese cities are not really livable. Air pollution is a big problem for them. So there is definitely that future for various reasons. And if you take it as a oil and gas investment, which it is, because the end product's the same, and just look at the production side, which is different, and you can understand, unconventional is really the same as conventional at the end of the day.
I'd like to know. Now, the whole world is getting higher temperature, right? Then they are emphasizing on climate change, which now they are going for something like solar energy, wind energy, or even those turbine or current. So how much damage or affect this oil production? That's number one. Number two is, now if you keep on drilling, will the earth structure become damaged, where you can get landslides and so on and so forth, where the government will come in and tell you stop, don't drill. what will be what you call the affection there? Thank you.
Okay, I'll address the second one first, maybe about the drilling into the structure. Certainly, I mean, drilling's been going on for a long time. We have, there are some issues that have come up in the States with this fracking. People are wondering if some minor earthquakes or something are being forced by this. But if you look at where we're drilling and you look at some of the charts that we showed, the water tables are very shallow versus where we are, and we're drilling way past that, but much deeper. And the fracks really shouldn't be affecting that at all. Now, when you do things underground and you do enough of them or you dispose of things, there could be some effects. We don't know. The science is out on that, I think. They're studying that. But certainly we're talking about hundreds of thousands of wells in the United States and no real dramatic effects at this point. So I think that it's a fairly minor issue. Obviously we got to look at the science and let people study it and figure out if there are something we need to change or something we need to do it a little differently. And all the governments and states in the United States are actually looking at that quite hard right now, but we don't have any conclusive evidence at this point.
No, I think once the earth structure had been weakened, right, it collapsed, and that would be very, very costly because you damage all the oil well, right? To what you call re-drill and so on and so forth. There's a lot of production costs involved, right?
If I may, the way it's produced, as I understand it, it's not what you imagine it to be. I think it's really drilling deep in the ground, about 10,000 feet into the ground, and there's lateral drilling, and so landslide is not a problem. There have been studies. It's disputed, of course. It's not really proven yet that fracking caused earthquakes, and in some countries, in Europe, for example, fracking is banned, and the U.S. you see a lot of legislation being passed to sort of like minimize all these disturbances to the soil, as well as regulation on the environmental side effect of producing shale oil and gas. Now, don't get me wrong, it's a production of oil and gas. It's an industrial process. It's not going to be clean. It will never be. But if it's controlled and managed properly, it should be fine. So the fracking process uses chemicals as part of the fracking process. So there are a lot of regulations in the US about the wastewater, because once you frack, the water flows out again together with chemicals and waste and all that stuff. So it needs to be maintained. Back to your first question about, is it polluting? Production of oil and gas, absolutely, it's polluting. But I guess the question is, can we live without what we are living now? Every one of us wants a comfortable lifestyle. And until the time when renewable energy is sufficiently efficient and cheap for us to replace oil and gas with renewables, we are not going to see it happening. At the moment, what I understand for some countries like Singapore, for example, I heard one time that even if we replace all the rooftop in Singapore with solar panels, we are going to only produce less than 10% of what we need, what we consume annually. So in the meantime, we've got to stay with oil and gas. So it's here to stay, unfortunately.
Good morning. My name is Lee from Malaysia. As a retail investor, I'm just wondering what will be our risk level to enter into the world energy, especially nowadays the crude oil price is very low. Could it be a good chance to enter? And share with us what might be the factors that might trigger the recovery of the crude oil price, maybe a few years down the road. Thank you.
Well, I think we tried to cover a little bit of that from the oil price, in that a lot of the pressure on the demand curve was from the U.S. increase in all that production from 5 million barrels a day to 9 million. And we're starting to see when the prices are lower, these are not as economic. The unconventionals are not as economic as the conventional reservoirs. And so with these lower prices, the rigs are on the side because they're not economic to drill. And so we're seeing the production roll over now. And as you saw from some of the curves, the production starts to drop pretty quickly on these things. They drop 90% plus a year in the first year. So as you stop drilling more, of course, the wells that are still being drilled are the better wells. But if you stop drilling as many wells, you should start seeing the production go down. And that's what we're seeing. At least that's in the United States, which was the biggest culprit of the increase. As far as where the price is going, I'm not going to venture out there. I think everybody that forecasts that is usually wrong. But I think there's going to be opportunities here for companies. We see that starting right now as prices on the sell and buy side get together. I mean, if you're expecting to get $100 a barrel and prices are really at 50 and you want to buy at 50, nobody's going to get together. But as people come off of that, or there's more pressure for people to sell or change assets, there may be some mergers. We've seen some pipeline mergers in the United States, starting to see some assets change hands as people get together on that. So there's opportunities for companies that have cash to go out and buy other assets and or merge with other companies and make them stronger.
As a lawyer, probably I'm the last person to talk about this, but I'm going to anyway. Well, internationally, I think if you look at the oil and gas market, what I read, all this is from what I read, some thought is that by 2020 you'll see a better recovery. But on the supply side, the two things that you need to think about is, in addition to what's happening right now, is Iranian nuclear accord has been reached recently. So the whole thing about this accord is that Iran will get sanction relief, and one of the first thing they will do is export crude when they achieve that, and gas as well probably. So that's a lot of demand coming to the market. But the good news is that it will take a while. Most earliest is probably 2016 before we actually see some of the sanctions relief being implemented. The second thing is the export of crude from the U.S. Now, that is 6 years ago or 7 years ago, you talk about that, people think you're crazy. But the U.S. is now going to export LNG. The first LNG cargo to Asia is coming out end of this year or next year from Cheniere's Sabine Pass LNG terminal. So the next thing to follow is crude. The problem is that on the legal perspective, crude is a very sensitive issue politically. Since the oil shock in the 1970s, export of crude is banned in the U.S. And politically, people will work, the folks in the U.S., like you and me, will start thinking about, if I'm American, they buy, my country export crude oil, and I'm going to pay more for my gasoline, my petrol at the petrol station. So it's a politically charged issue. But having said that, the U.S., as we all know, is committed to free market. And what I understand is that it's part of the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, as well as the other TTIP, I think that's the name, with Europe. So it's part of that bigger package. And U.S. actually been urged by a few countries, including South Korea, to start allowing export of crude oil. So that's two, supply factor that you need to think of.
I am Bill from Singapore. I just want to ask a couple of questions. You talk about all the production and us. Can you share with us what's the average cost of production for shale? Because in the past, the Saudi has been calling for $80 oil because they thought that was the production cost. But it seems that the production cost for shale has actually dropped, if I believe. And then I think the cost for different area between the denser, Eagle Ford, and Balkan is different production costs, because that will impact us. And the other question was actually answered, on the export, because at the current moment, there's nothing hitting Asia or worldwide from US. So even when the US legislation allowed the export of at least the first cargo of condensate come out, not crude, because most of the things that are coming up from shale are actually condensate rather than crude and gas. So, that will probably affect the oil price. But as for us as investors, I would like to know, what's the cost first, because that would affect whether there's economical, something that can be done. Secondly is in terms of investment, I think currently in the U.S. most of the shale explorers are all independents, right? And a lot of the probably I think the Chinese SOE would love to go in and buy it up, because currently the independents need more money, right? As if I'm not wrong, they need a lot of money to invest, to try to drill more well, to get more things out to the ground. So but the because politically, I think the Chinese would be restricted from investing in some of these strategic resources in the U.S. Would you see some of the oil major like Exxon, Mobil, who are currently not in the play, going back and buying up some of these companies?
Well, I'll try to address part of that to start with. I think one thing we want to get across is that you're asking about what the cost for shale production. They're all different. And within one shale, even the Bakken, for example, where all the oil production has come, it's a dramatic range. There's a core area in most of these, and everybody wants to say there's just one number to develop these. There's one number of reserves per one, and I guess Al showed a range between 500 and 700 MBOE per well. Well, the difference between those might be half of the play can be developed and half of it can't be developed. So the devil's in the details, as we like to say, and you need to know what area you're looking at. There are always core, better areas, better reservoir, and poorer areas, and the companies are going to have different plays. I mean, they're going to be in different parts of those plays. So, will there still be production? You can see what happens when prices go from 100 to 50. I mean, the rigs drop less than half. Certainly, the oil rigs are going from 1,600 to 600. That's a dramatic effect in a very short period of time, meaning that those are probably not economic wells, and it may be more. We have to understand, where each company's coming from and understand their asset base and where it's located in there as to how it's going to be re-affected when prices maybe go from $50 to $60 to $70.
Yeah, just to add, to clarify, the export of condensate has actually been allowed. U.S. have been exporting condensate since last year. It's a play on the legal side because crude cannot be exported, but products actually could be exported from the U.S. And condensate has been deemed a product because what these guys have done is that they ran it through a stabilizer. And that's how another managed to persuade the lawyers that, it's been processed. So yes, the U.S. has actually been exporting condensate, quite a large quantity.